You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS.
And welcome to Convenience Matters. My name is Jeff Leonard. I'm with NACS. And on Convenience Matters, we talk about things that matter to convenience stores. If they matter to convenience stores, they probably matter to just about everybody else, because we get about half of the U.S. population coming to a convenience store every day, whether to buy a drink or snack or something else.
And I'm Carolyn Schneer, also with NACS, and we're here helping you fuel your car, your day, and your mind.
And today, Carolyn, we're going to talk about the future. So we're pretty excited about that. Not just the future, but how do you make it practical? So today we're joined by a practical futurist, Michael Rogers, who has written for the New York Times. He's a acclaimed speaker. We've had him at a couple technology NACS events. And today we're going to learn a little bit about how to think about the future and how to prepare for the future. So welcome, Michael.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start off with an easy question. I hope it's an easy question. What is a practical futurist?
Well, it comes from my desire not to be one of those futurists who back in the 50s promised that we would all have flying cars by 1970.
And jetpacks.
I think futurists know that we don't quite have our flying cars yet. So futurists, I think, tend to sometimes be over-optimistic about how quickly things will happen. And since before I became a futurist, I worked as a journalist and also on the business side of journalism. I learned quite a bit, I think, about how the world works and what things are kind of in the way as we move towards the future. So I think a practical futurist is one who still has a vision of what things will be like 10 years from now, but thinks, more about what are the obstacles in the way, what's going to slow things down, and how do we get around those? So to me, that's being a practical futurist.
Michael, it's been a pleasure listening to you over the years at various NACS events, and you've always had such great insight, and I think everything you've ever said almost has come true. I think we've talked about cash payments. We talk about where's cash, where's credit cards, where's our vehicles, what about this, what's going to affect the convenience and any retail industry, and your insights have been spot on. I think what is something, we're jumping in the harder questions, Jeff. What's, looking at the convenience store industry and everything you know about it, what's something that we should be keeping our eye on?
Well, I think probably the next big piece is how artificial intelligence, the idea of finally really smart computers able to do a lot of things that humans can do and some things that humans can't do, how that is going to change the retail environment in terms of staffing, in terms of what our security cameras do, because in the future our security cameras won't just be, looking out for problems. They'll actually be studying customers and creating information about how to better serve those customers, or conceivably freaking those customers out because they think their privacy is invaded. So all of these things will be because we're finally getting to the point where even very small businesses can take advantage of powerful artificial intelligence.
And I think the whole topic of artificial intelligence almost flows into how do you use the people that you have, and how do you, whether you call it jobs, labor, just the people. And from the convenience store element, you're almost seeing convenience stores in the middle now with people on each side. On one side, you have delivery and delivery in all its forms, which is an added level of labor, whether it's delivery of food or even delivery of fuel. And at the other end, you have the elimination of labor with the so-called frictionless payments where there's no customers.
Self-checkout.
All those are where there's no clerks, not no customers. That would be a bad store. But so here we are in the middle where we have people, and how do we think about the future as using them as our best asset, which a lot of convenience stores try to find as the differentiator, because we all sell the same products.
Right. And I think the answer in almost every retail environment is to begin to create a new level of service, to really look at what humans can do that is unique, and that's sort of solving open-ended problems, not well-defined problems. Computers are good with well-defined problems. collaboration and communication. Those are the things that humans are good at, and robots and artificial intelligence will not be necessarily good at least not in the next few decades. So I think we almost have to start thinking about our employees as concierges in a way, to sort of provide a kind of personalized service, a touchstone, as it were, to humanity amidst what is inevitably going to be a more automated store experience. There's just no doubt about it that the efficiencies of more automated checkout, things like that, are going to come to the convenience stores, because to stay competitive you'll have to do that. So it'll become a question, really, I think, of what additional services the convenience store can offer. And that, I think, is a very interesting opportunity to begin to explore.
So, two things you talked about, and the artificial intelligence and the automatic everything. So something that's interesting is, now what do we do when a car drives itself, like an artificial car? An autonomous vehicle now just drives itself with these customers in it and comes up to our stores. Is that the way of the future? Autonomous cars, electric vehicles? What should we be looking out for there?
I think we've made incredible progress in just 10 years in self-driving autonomous vehicles, but I don't think that means we're going to have a whole bunch of them on the road anytime soon. At least not ones that are absent human beings. It's sort of no matter what the state and local governments do about regulating autonomous vehicles, it's the insurance companies who are looking at these and saying, well, you can make them legal to drive by themselves, but how are you going to get them insured? Insurers are very dubious. Ultimately, they're happy to insure almost anything as long as they understand the risk. They're comfortable with risk, but they're not comfortable with uncertainty. So I think the rollout of true self-driving cars is going to be much slower than we think. That said, there's going to be levels of autonomous driving that give the passenger, the driver, a little bit more leisure time. In a way, I think that we need to think about the convenience store as part of the network of cars. All cars and trucks are going to be they're going to be, as they would say in technology, nodes on a network, communicating with each other, ordering food, doing all these things on the road, where part of your driving responsibility is offloaded to an autonomous brain. But the convenience store is kind of the point at which you reach the physical world again. That's where you could pick up things that you've ordered. It needs to so I think that what the autonomous vehicle in the short term, and by that I mean 10 years or so, is going to do is just give drivers a little more leisure time, although it's still going to insist on their attention on a pretty regular basis. So I don't see true self-driving cars except in very limited situations. But I do think we're going to have more leisure time for the driver, and that'll be an interesting opportunity.
And I think right there you hit upon the practical and the practical futurist, in that the technology exists, the interest exists, but there's the matter of insurance companies and how does it become reality. One of the terms that we hear all the time in the industry, and maybe it's overused now, is disruption. And how do you think of disruption, or is that one of those words that you automatically have a fine jar, you have to put money in it because it's overused? Are there phrases like that, or things that you say, hey, interesting, but yeah, that was so last summer?
No, I think disruption is still a pretty good noun to describe, particularly what networks can do. And by networks I mean anything that connects people together with services. Because you just can't ignore what Uber, for example, managed to do. basically here in New York City, where I live, there's now 4 times more Uber cars than yellow cabs. Yet the yellow cab industry thought they sort of had this under control because they're politically very influential. But because of the network effect, which says that, the value of a network grows very, very quickly as you add more people, when a service is networked, it can grow so quickly that even a regulated industry like taxi cabs gets disrupted. So I think we're going to see more of that, and it will be in situations where a network spreads services very, very quickly, even more quickly than the existing players can adapt to.
And it's interesting you mentioned New York, because it makes us think that one of the things you hear is people are moving back to the cities, but we're also hearing, even in suburbia or even in rural areas, that the small store format tends to be winning more than larger formats. You have Toys R Us and various clothing stores and various malls under attack because something can be ordered and arrive a day later or even 2 hours later, and it's still okay with the customer. But with small format, there is a certain sense of immediacy. So whether it's a convenience store or whether it's a drugstore, dollar store, or pop-up store, is there anything related to these small format stores that people need to take advantage of or look out for as this is a concern down the road?
Well, I think it's a really good point that companies that are extremely successful in the online world, such as Amazon, are building physical stores now or buying physical stores, because what they're realizing is that they're going to reach the limits of what you can do with an entirely online business. And so I think, watching what Amazon does as it builds stores and buys, as it did recently Whole Foods, is going to provide some clues. The key piece that the convenience store industry has is that they are a sort of a trusted incumbent, and they're in the physical world. They need to figure out sort of how to work more with the networked world. And I think we're seeing, a lot of innovative stores move towards, accepting orders online, that kind of thing, being able to, have something ready to go for the customer as the customer arrives. That's an important direction. And by the way, the city versus country, the city versus suburb issue is by no means resolved. I think what we're already seeing is that as the millennial generation reaches family formation stage, the urban environment is simply too expensive to raise a family unless you are, in the top 5%. So I predict that there's going to be a real resurgence in the suburbs, and not just the suburbs on the coasts, but in the sort of moderately priced middle of the country. That's going to those areas are going to see a resurgence as well. We're going to distribute the population, I think, a little more evenly in the future.
Well, we've got stores on every corner, which is a good thing, I guess. And so those in Middle America and everywhere else in those small towns are still going to get those customers. And speaking of those, you mentioned online how we want to move. You can order online or order on your phone, and it's ready for you. And I know a lot of our retailers have that now, where you just order your sandwich and it's right there, or your soda or your coffee, and you can pick it up on the way wherever you're going. When you were at one of our conferences many years ago, and I'm not going to date myself on this one, you were talking about how, I guess I am going to date myself, how the
You dated
iPad,
all three of us.
Yeah, yes. I didn't say you were there. The iPad, you mentioned you were there, and you're like, there's this thing that Apple's going to do, and it's a tablet, and it's bigger than a phone, and it's amazing. And since that point, we've come so far, and Apple's releasing its new iPhone soon, if not today even. How is that going to affect both humankind, but in terms of artificial intelligence and augmented reality and everything? And how can our stores and our store owners and our marketers use that creatively?
I think, the next thing to think about really is augmented reality, as you mentioned, with the idea that, with the basically new software coming from both Google and Apple, who control quite a bit of the mobile device market right now in terms of software. The idea of augmented reality, where you can look at something through your smartphone camera and see information about it overlaid, that's going to be very, very important, and it's going to be part of the shopping experience. You'll be able to, for example, look at a product and get more information about it simply by looking at the product through the phone. Ultimately, these are going to migrate, I believe, to smart glasses. Maybe Apple will be able to call theirs eyeglasses. But I do believe that by the early 20s, that will be essentially, at least for younger people, if we make them look cool, something that they'll actually wear. So you'll be connected all the time to the virtual world, and the challenge for the retailer will be figuring out how do you add value to the retail experience that is, sort of a virtual layer on top of the physical goods.
So in other words, when I'm telling my daughter to put her phone down and pay attention to what's happening in front of her, the good thing is she might be doing something useful with that phone at that time.
Exactly. It's almost inevitable, I think, that I do believe that we are going to come up with a balance between when we use our devices and when we participate in the real world. But increasingly, the way that we interact with the real world will be through this layer of software. I think that's inevitable. I'm not positive it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm quite certain it's coming.
And it really is amazing how change is happening so fast. And we'll wrap up with just one more question, and maybe this can spur some thinking for a lot of our retailers, because we have stores that you may have hundreds of stores, you may have thousands of stores, you may also have one store. So when you're thinking about a very small retailer who has enough money to open a business, but doesn't necessarily have enough money to have Google Glasses or something like that, what advice do you have for a retailer, small or large, what they might do to think about the future that can be done fairly cost effectively in meeting a trend that is emerging?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one thing is what I call research and development, which is just to take some time in the day to go out on the internet and look at what's being done, for example, in Europe, around the same kind of stores. And you'll see ideas that I think are pretty interesting. There's a famous science fiction writer, William Gibson, who used to say, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And I think that's absolutely true. So really the first step is to just begin to look at what services and ideas there are outside of your immediate vicinity. And a lot of these things can be, these days, cloud-based software. So that means basically you don't have to buy a whole lot of extra equipment. You can, essentially use the equipment you have now and connect to new services. An example already in the convenience stores is the security cameras. The new generation is usually connected to the internet to begin with, IP-based, as they say, and those can be upgraded simply by connecting to new services in the cloud. So I think there's a lot of A, low-cost research, and B, low-cost experimentation that can go on. But it means that you need to take a little break from operational duties and really, do some research. One of my favorite examples is thinking about the future of cashless. You can spend some time looking at how Sweden has adopted almost an entirely cashless economy and get kind of a sense of what might be the case in the United States 5 or 6 or 7 years out when we become more cashless. Just one example.
And as always, Michael, it has been a pleasure speaking with you. We thank you for your time. And if you'd like to read more with Michael Rogers, go to his website, michaelrogers.com, or if you'd like to book him for one of your events. He's a great speaker, and I highly recommend him. And thank you for listening to Convenience Matters.
You've been listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by Nax. For more information, go to naxonline.com.